Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. How does it feel to feel, well, happy, feel good, mentally sound and stable? Our next guest here is really helping people all over the world do this. And of course, especially those in the workforce who may be in need of extra care. Georgena Grace is back with us today. The name of her company is called Integrated Wellbeing Institute. Welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm delighted to be back, Jill, and I'm great. How are you in this moment?
I'm doing well. Excited to have you here again. Your positive energy always shines through for sure. Would you mind just giving us a little bit of your background? Tell us about what you do, and we'll get into today's show. I know we got some great topics and conversation ahead for all of you today.
We do indeed. Well, Jill, Integrated Wellbeing Institute was created in 2020 because here we were in the middle of a pandemic and people were swimming in global grief. Well, I'm no stranger to grief, as my story states on my website. 5 people in my family died in less than 4 years, and 3 of those were sudden deaths, so there was no goodbye. So as a result of that, I have been in many states of grief myself and have been working with grieving people for over 25 years now. Wow. And so the Institute was created to say, hey, we can't think our way through grief. Grief lives in the body. Let's train people in mind-body processes so they can support their clients in grief. So we work with nurses, coaches, and therapists to share this information.
Oh, well, thank you for being here and for joining us and for being so open and helpful to so many people. And again, unfortunately, your grief has brought you an expertise in a field where you probably never thought you'd be here to help other people, but it's a beautiful thing that you're doing, and I commend you for that. I just want to ask you, are you actually retired?
Oh, Jill, I have failed retirement twice.
Wow.
So now what I do have, though, is a lovely balance of work and play. So I travel, and I had a dinner party here last night and am up ready to speak to you and to see clients today.
Wow. Well, thank you for being here, for joining us. Let's talk about grief and specifically what it is.
I'm glad you asked, because grief is that internal state of deep, dark, anguished feelings, thoughts, and beliefs that live in the body. So it's important for people to really stop and realize, oh, wow, there's a lot to grief. There's the physical component, there's the emotional component, there's the mental component. Yeah. So grief is quite complex.
Well,
and
go ahead.
No.
Do you want to talk a little about your program principles as well?
Sure.
And how, again, then the grief affects us? Thank you.
So the training program for professionals working with grieving people is based on specific principles. And today we're talking about principle number 3, which is curiosity is the path to self-compassion. And it's very interesting, Jill, how very, very few books written about grief have the word curiosity in the index at the back. It's not talked about, but curiosity is a superpower. You can't be critical of yourself and curious at the same time. So for those of you in the audience right now who may not be grieving and wondered, oh my goodness, how did I get to this program? Here's the gem for you.
Yeah.
If your critic comes up, that mean mind that many of us have comes up, you can stop, pause, breathe, and ask the question even out loud. Well, I'm curious. What are you here for? Why are you bugging me? Why'd you come back today with this, whatever it is that's going on?
Oh my goodness. Well, also, this somatic grief you talk about, your body is the path to the present, right? And how
Yes.
grief really does affect us. You see, grief lives in the body. We cannot think our way through grief.
Hmm.
And how did you first experience grief in your body? I mean, you feel it, you think in your mind, but no, it does take a toll on you with all
It
different
does.
ways.
It
Could you
does.
share some of the
Hmm.
symptoms of what starts to happen?
Sure. So in the program, we have a wonderful tool called the Grief Awareness Assessment. And there are 10 different physical aspects of grief that each person can respond to. My own grief, Jill, initially after my son's death, was a bone aching fatigue and
Mm-hmm.
the inability to breathe deeply and a loss of appetite.
Uh-huh.
So many people, though, experience insomnia,
Yeah.
dizziness, nauseousness. Those are
Mm-hmm.
just six of them. And for me, I just was so stunned that I felt so exhausted by my grief. And I'm not alone in that. Working with hundreds and hundreds of people, so many people have said there's a heaviness. I feel like I'm slogging through molasses. I am so tired. So,
Uh,
for anyone out there listening who has had a significant loss in the last 2 years, please give yourself that self compassion.
mm-hmm.
When instead of saying, "What's wrong with me?"
Yeah.
there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with you. You're
Yeah.
grieving.
Mm-hmm. It's true,
Okay.
and that's okay. It
Yes.
is.
Mm-hmm.
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 And what's really the most startling part of the body that gets affected? What would you say, though? Is it that or?
Oh, so for me in my own grief journey, Jill, as a parent who's lost a child, your heart is broken, you cry 24/7, and the pain is so intense. And that's what I experienced for that first 6 months. Well, Reed would have been 16 in July. So we
Uh,
had his friends come on his birthday for a big barbecue in the backyard.
mm-hmm.
And so at the end of dinner, they looked at us and said, "We're going to the cemetery to have a birthday party for Reed." And it was like, okay. And so we wished them well on their way. The next morning, when I woke up, it was like, you better check out that cemetery and see
Yeah.
what condition those kids left it in. So when
Yeah.
I got there, Jill, all there were all these little stubs of blue birthday candles around Reed's grave. Well, because he was an artist, he had this amazing headstone that was flat on the ground, and some of the wax
Uh,
had dripped down into the porousness of it. So it was like, oh my goodness, it was already discoloring the stone. So I went home, boiled water, got a paring knife, came back, kneeled down on my hands and knees, and was digging the wax out of the headstone. And all of a sudden, Jill, it felt like a saber-toothed tiger grabbed my left shoulder and was just shaking me to death.
uh,
And I screamed out loud. The pain was so great. And Jill, it was so different than any pain I'd had since Reed's death.
yeah.
So I put my hand on my shoulder, and the minute I touched my shoulder, the pain went away.
Uh-huh.
So this was very intriguing. I was
Mm-hmm.
curious. Well, in November of that year, I
Uh,
began my training as a somatic therapist.
mm,
And the very first week, we worked in pairs.
yeah.
And a colleague of mine was sitting facing my left shoulder, and she put her hand on the front of my shoulder
Wow.
and her other hand on the back. And she
Huh.
said, "Georgina, what are you noticing?" And that pain came back like that, Jill. And I said, and we were in a room with 54 people during the
Ah,
Rubenfeld Synergy Method training. So
wow.
I gritted my teeth. I spoke as low as I could, and I
Ah,
said, "Pain, pain like a saber-toothed tiger."
yeah.
What she did is she allowed herself to hold the pain listen to the pain, be present with me. And then she took her hands, Jill, and she moved down my shoulder, down my arm,
Wow.
out my hand and my fingertips, and the pain went away.
Mm.
So we were startled, we were stunned. So we went to a faculty member and we said to
Wow.
them, "What happened?" And
Mm-hmm.
this person said, "Oh, your shoulder is the back of your heart energy place in the body. What
Wow.
you were feeling was the pain in your heart." And this particular method then teaches people, Jill, the metaphors of the body. So in this case, I was still shouldering so much of the guilt of my son's
Mm.
death that there it was in my shoulder, as well as the heartbrokenness.
Wow, amazing. And that's, at the same time, that's so sad and so common. It happens to all of us. And
Yes, it does.
you probably don't even realize it, obviously. So I'm glad Georgina Grace is joining us here, making us aware. If you're just tuning in, don't forget it's Integrated Wellbeing Institute, and the website is integratedwellbeinginstitute.com as well. If you have any questions as we continue our journey. What about the saber-toothed tiger incident?
Yes, and that was the
Is
one that
that
I
the
just described.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Hmm.
I'm like,
Hmm.
that's okay.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
let's move on to the great therapy and the
Yes,
making, would you say makes a really great coach, a great therapist? Could you
right.
talk about that a little bit?
Well, one of the things that I know is presence is so important to be a great therapist, a
Mm-hmm.
great coach, as you, a great journalist. You have to be present to the person with you. And one of the things that happens to us as practitioners is we begin to feel what's happening with the person we're connected with. And so oftentimes, Jill, people grieving
Yeah.
arrive dissociated. They're not present
Mm-hmm.
in their body. They're
Yep.
not focused in the present moment. It's too painful to be
Mm-hmm.
physically, mentally, and emotionally present.
Yep.
And yet, we all know that our way through this grief is in the present moment. So, when the therapist can be present, the coach can be present, and teach people to be present to themselves, that's when the magic happens.
Yeah.
It's really neat.
Wow.
So, we're here, Integrated Wellbeing Institute. Our
Mm-hmm.
mission is to awaken
Yeah.
the griever to the inner peace that everybody has through the guidance of their body. Because, as we all know, significant loss just shatters us. And
Yeah.
our purpose in the Integrated Wellbeing Institute is to provide these body mind processes then so people in grief can find that inner peace,
Yeah.
live from that inner peace, and finally be aware that really grief is a gateway to growth.
Yeah. And how do you greet your clients, Georgina?
Well, I greet them by saying, "How are you in this moment?" Just like I did you
Yeah.
today.
Ah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Yes.
because Jill, what I'm so aware of is when I say to you, "How are you in this moment?" Where did your attention go?
So right now. Right
Exactly.
now, like, yeah, like right now, you're right. How are you is such a vague question. I'm like, I really can't tell her how I'm feeling. Like, am I really stressed out because my kids were late for the school? Like, all that stuff. But in this moment, it's like, oh, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I got that.
Exactly. And
I
so
never
that's,
noticed that.
yes.
Interesting.
And see, and grieve, and people who are grieving
Uh-uh.
hate, "How are
Uh,
you?" Because
yeah.
it's like, do you really want to know
Yeah.
how?
Yeah.
People don't. It's this term is like, it's "Hi, how are you?" It's automatic, and in many regards it's mindless and thoughtless when we're asking that of a person who is grieving. So
Mm-hmm.
when we can say, "How are you in this moment?" it takes people out of their head and into their body.
Mm-hmm.
It allows them to really notice, oh, what's happening. So I'll give you an example of what happened to me. a person came up to me. It was just months after Reed had died. And she was so happy to see me. And the fact that I was still walking and talking and, I was out and about.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Oh, Georgena, how are you?"
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to answer. "I'm heartbroken. I'm crying all the time. This is a big deal to be out." So I said to her the truth. "I'm relieved to see you. It's been so long."
Mm.
And so I would invite anyone in our audience today, Jill, that's listening, to begin to ponder and then practice asking the people that they are in contact with just for the rest of this day. It's a short little experiment, asking them, "How are you in this moment?" And see what happens to the quality of
Uh-huh.
the interaction.
Yeah. Wow.
Because, how are you? Just it's that cognitive thing, and it puts people in their head. But by asking, "How are you in this moment?" we offer them an invitation to be with us.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
And it'll be
Interesting.
interesting to see if you
Mm-hmm.
go home and attempt to do this little experiment with your children,
Yeah. All
because
right.
it would be so interesting to see if they get it,
Yep.
or if this is something that's got a developmental quality to it, an age kind of thing. So,
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well,
mm-hmm,
interesting.
mm-hmm,
All
mm-hmm.
right. Are
Yeah,
we want to continue or are we ready to talk about some of the six deadly D's?
we're ready on
All
that,
right, bring
Jill.
it on.
Okay, all right. So, one of the things that is interesting, people will say, "Well, I haven't had anybody die,
Yeah.
but I sure don't feel good." What we as a culture don't realize is that grief is a natural consequence of significant loss.
Yeah.
And there are many kinds of losses. So think about all the people who've experienced the loss of their home because of natural disasters. And we've seen them, Jill, time and time again on TV in tears. Their whole
Yeah.
life has been shattered and they're in grief. We
Yeah.
just don't always recognize it. So people then can't name it and claim it and then move through it.
Yeah.
Another kind of deadly D that results in this significant loss and grief
Mm-hmm.
is the destruction that happens in bullying, in war, in the murder of sexual abuse, emotional abuse. All of that is trauma that results in the significant loss of our safety and security. So we can say, "Who am I now? I don't even know. I'm not here in my body. I'm just off."
Yeah.
So that's another significant loss that can result in grief, as
Yeah.
well as the despair. It is really hard to hear of another school shooting, another um, event in our culture that has caused such pain to people.
Mm-hmm.
So, natural disasters, destruction, despair, a diagnosis, Jill,
Yeah.
is another form of a
Right.
deadly D. And how
Mm-hmm.
often in our culture do we stop to mourn what's happened in our body before we get on with it and say, "Okay, we're going to fight this"? And that's a perfectly logical thing. We want to live, and there are many options that we have to deal with this disease. But first, we have to recognize, oh, this is a significant loss. And then, of course, there's divorce. And how many times is divorce often a celebration? "Oh my goodness, I'm very happy I'm done with this."
Yeah.
Or it can put us in that significant loss. Who am I now? What's going to happen with me?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the death. Not only the death of a person, Jill, but
Yeah.
the death of a pet,
Ah.
and the death of a dream. What was it that was your heart's desire for so many years? And you can see right now it's not going to happen. So it's important for people to stop and recognize these 6 deadly Ds: the natural disasters, diagnosis, divorce, despair, destruction, and death that can result then in grief. Because there's
Ah,
nothing wrong with you, you're grieving.
no. Beautiful. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Interesting. All
Mm-hmm.
right. And we still have a few minutes left in the show. Do you want to talk about some specifics in regards to maybe some aspects of the work that you want to also, focus on for today?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe talk about how
Yes.
you got your start.
Well, it was really interesting because doing all of this grief work um, over the years, it was like, oh, it needs to be naturally put into a program so people can then experience the body mind processes as a way through grief. But at the beginning of the show, I really appreciated how you said the Institute is also working with business people.
Mhm.
And so I work with corporations, specifically their HR professionals, training them to work with those employees that come in a heightened state of stress and anxiety. And so, Jill, on the website, integratedwellbeinginstitute.com, are resources for business professionals and businesses. And so if you go to that link and scroll all the way down to the bottom, there is a place that people can click on for workplace ER. And what it is, Jill, is a free resource library that's out there allowing people to bring themselves into the present moment with breath techniques, feel your feet, overwhelm education, how to immediately shift overwhelm. So all of those resources are there and they're free for anyone in the audience that wants to access them. I truly believe that we all are so well resourced. Sometimes, though, the frenzy of the outside world covers up our ability to access that inner
Yeah.
peace. So
Yeah.
that's what it is there for our listeners today that I really would love to have people access.
Perfect. And would you mind reminding us then how we can reach out to you?
Certainly. The old fashioned way by calling me 503 309 3966 or by typing in integratedwellbeinginstitute.com. And as I said, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the business page and you'll find the workplace ER. And then, Jill, just for fun, if some of this has been helpful, please go to my YouTube channel, Georgena Grace. And we are just interviewing people there
Yeah.
all the time. So there's lots of
Wonderful.
information.
Always a pleasure to have you again, Georgina Grace. Also, want to commend you on the work you're doing for so many people at your institute and helping people get through this. It's not easy, but it will get better. Integrated Wellbeing Institute.com. Reach out to her. She's based out of Portland, Oregon, but she's working with people all over the world. And again, Georgina, we appreciate you being here and so glad you haven't retired, or else I wouldn't have you here.
Thanks, Jill. You all have a wondrous day.
You too, sweetheart. Thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, please stay tuned. More of the show is coming up after the break.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcasts on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.